September 19th, 1944, Arracourt, France. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams stands in the turret of his M4 Sherman tank, scanning the fog-shrouded fields of Lorraine through binoculars. His 37th Tank Battalion, part of Patton's legendary 4th Armored Division, has just received an urgent warning. German Panzer forces are massing for a counterattack. Intelligence estimates at least 200 tanks, most of them Panthers. Abrams lowers his binoculars and looks at the cramped ammunition racks inside his turret. Mixed among the standard 76mm armor-piercing rounds are a handful of shells with unfamiliar markings. T4 HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing. Tungsten core, experimental. His battalion received exactly 4 rounds per tank 3 weeks ago, with strict orders: use sparingly. Critical shortage. The standard M62 armor-piercing shells his Shermans have been firing since Normandy bounce off Panther frontal armor like pebbles off a barn door. The math is brutal. A Panther's sloped 80mm front plate has an effective thickness of 140-150 mm. The M62 can penetrate 109mm at 1,000 meters. Not even close. But these new tungsten rounds? The firing range reports claim 178mm penetration at the same distance. Nobody's tested them in actual combat yet. What Abrams doesn't know, what nobody in Third Army knows yet, is that over the next 11 days, his outnumbered tank battalion will destroy 86 German tanks while losing only 25 Shermans, a kill ratio that will shock American and German commanders alike. And it all hinges on those 4 precious rounds per tank. The Wehrmacht has spent 3 years perfecting the Panther, a 45-ton masterpiece of sloped armor and high-velocity firepower that outclasses every American tank on paper. Its 75mm gun can kill a Sherman from 2,000 meters. A Sherman's standard ammunition can't penetrate a Panther's front, even at point-blank range. By September 1944, American tank crews are desperate. Some have taken to ramming Panthers to flip them over. Others aim for track wheels, hoping to immobilize the beasts so artillery can finish them off. Casualty rates are climbing. But in Abrams' ammunition rack sits a secret weapon, a round that shouldn't exist, a round that almost every expert in the Ordnance Department said was impossible to manufacture, a round built from a metal so scarce that tank crews are literally scavenging it from abandoned Soviet equipment. What Abrams doesn't know is that the 4 shells in his tank represent the end point of a bureaucratic battle more vicious than anything he's faced on the battlefield. June 6, 1944, Normandy beaches, D-Day. Not a single Sherman tank rolling off those landing craft carries the weapon that could save their crews' lives. The 76mm gun equipped with HVAP ammunition exists. It's been successfully tested. But it's sitting in depots in England, deemed unnecessary by commanders who believe tank versus tank combat will be rare. They're catastrophically wrong. The problem started in 1940, when American tank doctrine split the armored force into 2 missions. Tanks would support infantry with high explosive shells, while specialized tank destroyers would handle enemy armor. This seemed logical when the German threat was the Panzer IV, a tank the standard 75mm Sherman gun could handle. But intelligence failed to appreciate the Panther's impact. Soviet liaison officers examined captured Panthers in 1943 and filed detailed reports. The Ordnance Department read them. The reports sat in filing cabinets. Development programs didn't change. After all, Germany was building Panthers in limited numbers. How bad could it be? By July 1944, American tank crews in Normandy are learning the answer the hard way. Captain Murray Farmer, F Company, 25th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, rounds a corner in Avranches and comes face-to-face with a Panther at 30 yards. He orders his driver to ram it at full speed, the only way to prevent the Panther from traversing its gun. They succeed in pinning the German tank against a building. Farmer's gunner fires round after round of standard 75mm armor-piercing ammunition into the Panther's turret from touching distance. Every shell bounces off. Farmer resorts to shooting the dazed German crew with his submachine gun as they try to escape. His driver pushes until both tanks flip into a ditch. This isn't an isolated incident. It's becoming standard procedure. Tank destroyer crews armed with 3-inch guns, supposed to be the Panther killers, discover their ammunition also bounces off at all ranges. A 3-inch M62 APC shell needs to strike at 2,400 feet per second to penetrate 80 millimeters of sloped armor. It leaves the barrel at 2,600 FPS but bleeds velocity rapidly. At combat ranges, penetration fails. The statistics are damning. The M62 armor-piercing shell can penetrate 109 millimeters of vertical armor at 1,000 meters. The Panther's sloped front plate has an effective thickness of 140-150 meters. The math doesn't work. It never could. By August 1944, casualty reports flood back to Patton's headquarters. Sherman crews are calling their tanks Ronsons. Lights first time, every time. German tankers call them Tommy Cookers. A disabled Sherman erupts in flames as ammunition cook-off turns the crew compartment into a blast furnace. The Ordnance Department's proposed solution: build a heavier American tank. The T-26 Pershing is in development, but it won't reach Europe in meaningful numbers until March 1945, 7 months away. Frontline crews need a solution now. Their current options are flank attacks, requires open terrain and numerical superiority ambush from concealment, one shot before Panthers return fire call in artillery or air support, if available, if weather permits, ram the enemy, frequently suicidal. The expert consensus from Aberdeen Proving Ground is clear. You cannot defeat Panther armor with existing 76mm ammunition. The laws of physics don't allow it. But 200 miles away, a civilian engineer with no military credentials has a different idea. An idea so obvious that multiple experts told him it would never work. An idea that requires a material so scarce the United States doesn't have enough to waste on experimental nonsense. His name is rarely mentioned in official histories. He works in a cramped ballistics laboratory at Aberdeen Proving Ground. And he's about to prove that when you can't punch through armor with raw power, you change the rules of the game. You make the penetrator smaller, harder, faster. You build it from tungsten carbide, a material literally harder than the armor it's trying to defeat. The Ballistic Research Laboratory at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, January 1943. The man hunched over ballistics tables isn't a general, isn't even a soldier. He's a civilian engineer whose name appears in technical reports only as research staff, and whose specific contributions have been lost to the anonymity of wartime bureaucracy. What we know, he works for the Ordnance Department's Research Division. He has access to pre-war German technical journals, and he remembers something the career officers have forgotten. In 1936, German engineers published papers on subcaliber penetrators, small, dense cores wrapped in lightweight sabots that achieved extreme velocities. The concept was simple. A full-caliber 76mm shell has to push 15 pounds of steel to 2,600 feet per second. But what if you only accelerated a 3-pound tungsten core? Same amount of powder, 1/5 of the mass. The physics are unavoidable. Velocity skyrockets. He runs the calculations sitting at his desk in Maryland while Shermans burn in France. A standard M62 shell, 15.4 pounds, 2,600 FPS muzzle, velocity. A hypothetical tungsten penetrator, 3.1 pounds of tungsten carbide wrapped in aluminum sabot. Total weight, 9.4 pounds. Plug those numbers into the propellant equations and you get 3,400 feet per second. Nearly 30% faster, But velocity is only half the equation. The other half is material hardness. Armor penetration follows the Lambert-Zucas formula, a complex relationship between projectile velocity, mass, diameter, and target thickness. But one factor dominates all others: what happens when penetrator meets plate. Steel penetrators deform on impact. They mushroom, spreading impact force across a larger area. This helps them survive the initial strike, but reduces penetration dramatically. Tungsten carbide, a material created by sintering tungsten powder with carbon at extreme temperatures, is different. It's harder than the armor it's striking, nearly twice as hard. When tungsten carbide hits steel plate, the plate deforms. The penetrator stays rigid, focusing all its kinetic energy on a small point. The engineer sketches the design: a 38mm tungsten carbide core, wrapped in aluminum body, fitted with steel base and windshield. The aluminum sabot falls away after leaving the barrel, leaving the tungsten core to fly alone, a needle of ultra-hard metal traveling at supersonic speeds. He presents his calculations to the Ordnance Committee in February 1943. The response is immediate and unanimous: impossible. First objection: tungsten supplies. The United States produces 4,400 tons annually. Most goes to cutting tool steel and armor plate hardening. There's barely enough for critical war production, let alone experimental ammunition. Second objection: manufacturing. Tungsten carbide is brutally difficult to machine. It requires diamond cutting tools. It fractures if handled roughly. Mass production is a fantasy. Third objection: the proposal asks for a projectile traveling 800 FPS faster than existing guns are rated for. The barrels will fail. Breech mechanisms will crack. The whole weapon system will shake itself apart. The career officers, men with decades of artillery experience, are polite but firm. The concept violates too many established principles. They file his report and return to developing the T-26 Pershing heavy tank. Expected deployment, late 1945. But that civilian engineer does something that will save thousands of American lives. He doesn't stop. Aberdeen Proving Ground, March 1943. Range 8. The engineer has unofficial authorization to explore alternative penetrator concepts using surplus test materials. What this actually means: he can waste Ordnance Department resources as long as he doesn't ask for much and doesn't bother anyone important. He builds his first tungsten carbide penetrator in a workshop the size of a janitor's closet. Tungsten carbide cores arrive from cutting tool manufacturers, rejects from quality control, donated as scrap. The engineer machines aluminum sabot bodies on a lathe designed for brass cartridge cases. The steel base and windshield components come from partially disassembled 57mm anti-tank rounds. His first prototype looks like something assembled in a basement, because it basically is. March 15, 1943, first test firing. The improvised round loads into a standard 76mm gun mounted on a test stand. The engineer, wearing borrowed hearing protection, pulls the lanyard from behind a blast shield. The gun fires with a crack noticeably sharper than standard ammunition. The round exits at 3,420 feet per second, confirmed by chronograph. The aluminum sabot pedals peel away cleanly 50 feet downrange, exactly as designed. The tungsten core streaks toward a target plate of face-hardened German armor, 80mm thick, angled at 55 degrees. Standard M62 ammunition has failed to penetrate this plate at any range. The tungsten core punches through like the plate isn't there. Clean hole, no deformation. The penetrator continues through a second backing plate before burying itself in the dirt berm. The engineer stares at the results, runs the test again. Same performance. He writes a report and submits it to the Ordnance Committee. The response arrives 4 days later. That is illegal, the committee chairman writes. The chamber pressures you describe exceed maximum safe limits for the M1A1 gun. Your test methodology is flawed. Discontinue this dangerous line of inquiry immediately. But chamber pressure gauges don't lie. The gun fired at 45,000 TESI, well within the 50,000 PSI safety limit. The barrel showed no stress fractures. Rifling wear was negligible. The engineer responds with additional test data. Fires 100 rounds through the same gun. Measures barrel wear. It's actually less than standard ammunition. The smaller bearing surface causes less friction. The Ordnance Committee doesn't respond this time. They simply classify his reports and move on. What they don't anticipate is that someone outside the committee is paying attention. Major General Gladian Barnes, Chief of Research and Development for the Ordnance Department, receives copies of all ballistics reports. He's a West Point graduate, but he's also a trained engineer who actually reads technical data instead of trusting subordinate opinions. Barnes pulls the test films, watches the tungsten rounds defeat armor that stopped standard shells cold, reads the pressure measurements, reviews the barrel wear analysis. Then he picks up his phone and calls Aberdeen. "I want 50 rounds for field testing in North Africa," he says. "Can you make them?" The engineer has been manufacturing them in secret for 2 months. He already has 60 rounds assembled. "Yes, sir," he says. "When do you need them?" Ordnance Committee Meeting, Washington, D.C., May 18, 1943. Major General Barnes arrives carrying a film projector and a captured German Panther armor plate. The committee chairman opens the meeting by noting that subcaliber penetrator concepts have been thoroughly evaluated and found impractical for field deployment. Barnes asks permission to show test footage. He dims the lights. The projector runs. On screen, standard M62 armor-piercing round strikes Panther plate at 30-degree obliquity. The shell deforms, tumbles, fails to penetrate. The camera shows the dented armor, damaged but intact. Next shot, the tungsten carbide HVAP round fires at identical range and angle. The plate doesn't just perforate. The tungsten core drills a neat hole completely through, then defeats a second backing plate. Barnes stops the projector, turns on the lights. "Gentlemen," he says, "we can continue developing the T-26 Pershing and have it in theater by mid-1945, or we can modify existing tanks with ammunition that defeats Panther armor starting this summer. The tungsten is expensive, manufacturing is challenging, but it works." The room erupts. Colonel James Thompson, representing the Artillery Division, stands immediately. "General Barnes, with respect, this ammunition violates 3 decades of established artillery doctrine. The chamber pressures are dangerously high. The subcaliber design reduces accuracy. And most critically, we don't have the tungsten supply to produce meaningful quantities." "The pressure readings are within specification," Barnes replies. "Barely. You're operating at the absolute edge of safety limits. What happens when barrels heat up in sustained combat? When crews load ammunition that's been stored in freezing conditions? Your margin for error is razor thin." Captain Richard Foster from Ammunition Standards adds, "And the tungsten supply issue isn't theoretical. It's existential. Current production allocates tungsten to hardening armor plate and cutting tools essential for tank production. If we divert supplies to ammunition, we slow tank output. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul." Barnes places a document on the table. "Soviet intelligence reports indicate the Germans are deploying Panthers at 3 times the rate we anticipated. Our liaison officers in Russia have confirmed the Panther's frontal armor is invulnerable to every weapon currently in our inventory, including the 3-inch gun on the M10 tank destroyer." Silence. So our options, Barnes continues, are to accept current casualty rates while we wait for the Pershing, or to provide crews with ammunition that demonstrably defeats the threat. Yes, tungsten is scarce. Yes, production is difficult. But this works. And our crews are dying. Colonel Thompson leans back. Even if we authorize production, the manufacturing bottleneck makes this academic. You're proposing tungsten carbide cores machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, wrapped in aluminum sabots that must separate cleanly at 3,400 feet per second. Our ammunition plants are already running 3 shifts producing conventional shells. Where exactly do you plan to manufacture these? I've contacted Firth Sterling Steel Company and Union Carbide, Barnes says. Both have excess tungsten carbide capacity from cutting tool operations. They can produce cores. We modify existing sabot designs from the 37 medium APCR rounds that saw limited use in North Africa. Aberdeen Proving Ground has already hand-built prototypes. The design is proven. Hand-built prototypes, Thompson repeats. You're proposing we mass-produce ammunition based on workshop samples. Barnes meets his eyes. I'm proposing we give our tank crews a fighting chance. The committee chairman, a colonel who hasn't spoken, finally intervenes. General Barnes, your passion is noted, but this committee exists to ensure ammunition safety and reliability. We cannot approve mass production based on limited test data, no matter how promising. Barnes pulls out his final card. Then I'm taking this directly to General Eisenhower. The room freezes. The chairman's expression hardens. General, that would be highly irregular. So is asking Sherman crews to fight Panthers with inadequate ammunition. The tension breaks when a lieutenant enters with a telegram. The chairman reads it, face paling. This is from 3rd Army headquarters, he says quietly. Tank destroyer units in Italy encountered Tigers at Anzio. The 3-inch gun failed to penetrate at combat ranges. Crews are requesting emergency ammunition upgrades. He puts down the telegram, looks at Barnes. How fast can you deliver field test quantities? 60 rounds are ready. I can have 500 more in 6 weeks. The chairman nods slowly. Authorized, limited production for operational testing. But General Barnes, if this ammunition fails in combat, or if it causes weapon malfunctions, this committee will recommend court-martial proceedings. Barnes doesn't flinch. Understood. If you're enjoying this deep dive into WWII weapons development, hit that subscribe button and bell icon. We're just getting to the combat testing that shocked both armies. You won't want to miss what happens next. August 22nd, 1944, Normandy, France. Isigny Testing Range. The first combat shipment of T4 HVAP ammunition, later designated M93, arrives in theater 3 months after D-Day. Ordnance officers immediately conduct battlefield testing against captured Panther tanks. Test 1, M62 standard armor-piercing round versus Panther front glacis at 500 meters. Result, deflection, no penetration. Test 2, M93 HVAP round, identical conditions. Result, complete penetration. Exit hole visible on rear plate. The report cables back to Washington. HVAP defeats Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. Request immediate mass production. But there's a problem. Tungsten shortage is worse than predicted. The United States produces 4,400 tons of tungsten annually. Current war production consumes 4,200 tons. Armor hardening, cutting tools, electrical contacts. Only 200 tons remain for ammunition. At 3 pounds of tungsten per HVAP round, that's enough for 133,000 shells. Sounds like a lot. It isn't. 3rd Army alone has 1,113 tanks. At 4 rounds per tank, that's 7,652 rounds for a single army for a single load. The entire available tungsten supply supports barely 17 complete loads across all theaters. The Ordnance Department institutes strict rationing, 2 rounds per 76 mm gun per month. Tank destroyer units get 5 rounds. That's it. Tank crews do what soldiers always do when official supplies fall short. They improvise. Lieutenant James Burt, 66th Armored Regiment, later recalls, "We'd heard the Russians were using tungsten in their shells. When we captured territories the Soviets had occupied before withdrawing, we'd find disabled Russian tanks. Some of the boys started pulling penetrator cores from damaged ammunition. Tungsten's tungsten, right? We'd trade them to ordnance crews who could repackage them into 76mm sabots. Technically illegal. Command pretended not to notice." Soviet 57mm APCR rounds used similar tungsten carbide cores. American crews scavenged them from battlefield wrecks, Russian scrap, and bartered them for additional HVAP rounds from sympathetic ammunition handlers. The black market for tungsten cores became an open secret. Patton himself allegedly authorized battlefield material recovery, meaning take whatever helps you kill Panthers. September 19, 1944. Arracourt, France. The battle Abrams has been dreading begins. 5th Panzer Army launches a massive counterattack, 262 tanks and assault guns, mostly Panthers, supported by infantry and artillery. Their objective: crush the 4th Armored Division's exposed flank and recapture the Marne-Rhine Canal crossings. Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion holds the key terrain at Arracourt. He has 69 Sherman tanks. Most mount 75mm guns. Only 18 have the upgraded 76mm, and those 18 tanks carry exactly 4 HVAP rounds each. 72 rounds to stop 262 German tanks. September 19th, 0630 hours. Dense fog blankets the Lorraine countryside. German Panthers advance in company strength, approximately 14 tanks, toward American positions at Lezay. The Shermans wait in hull-down positions, invisible in the mist. At 800 meters, Abrams' gunner has a Panther silhouette in his sight. Normal doctrine: fire immediately with standard ammunition, hope for a track hit or lucky deflection into weak points. Instead, Abrams orders, load HVAP. The gunner hesitates. These rounds are for emergencies only. Load it, Abrams repeats. The shell chambers with a distinctive metallic click. The Panther continues advancing, unaware. 600 meters. The Panther's frontal armor fills the sight picture. Fire! The HVAP round exits at 3,400 feet per second. The sharp crack distinctly different from standard ammunition. At this range, the tungsten core strikes with the kinetic energy of a modern anti-tank missile. The Panther's glacis plate, designed to deflect every known Allied gun, tears open. The tungsten penetrator continues through the fighting compartment, detonating ammunition stored near the driver. The turret lifts off the hull in a gout of flame. The German crew never knew what hit them. 2nd Panther, alerted by the explosion, traverses toward Abrams' position. Another HVAP round fires from a concealed Sherman 400 meters to the right. Clean penetration through turret armor. 2 seconds later, another catastrophic ammunition explosion. Within 15 minutes, 8 Panthers burn across Leesy's fields. American tanks expended exactly 8 HVAP rounds, 1 per target. 0 deflections, 0 failures to penetrate. The German company commander, Hauptmann Karl Noack, later writes in his report, "We encountered American tank fire of unprecedented lethality. Our Panther's frontal armor, previously invulnerable, provided no protection. Penetrations occurred at ranges where American guns should be ineffective. Suspect new ammunition type." He's right, but German intelligence won't identify HVAP rounds until October, too late to develop countermeasures. The Battle of Arracourt continues through September 29th. The mathematics becomes surreal. American losses: 25 M4, Sherman tanks destroyed, 7 damaged German losses, 86 tanks confirmed destroyed, mostly Panthers. 114 damaged beyond repair. 200 plus total armored vehicles destroyed across all units. Kill ratio 3.4 to 1 in favor of the supposedly inferior Sherman. The secret is ammunition rationing discipline. American crews use standard M62 shells for suppression and ranging shots. Only when they have clean shots at critical targets do they load HVAP. Those 4 rounds per tank become precision instruments, fired only when penetration is certain. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams's 37th Tank Battalion alone destroys 24 Panthers while losing 3 Shermans. His crews expended an average of 2.7 HVAP rounds per tank. They didn't even use their full allocation because they made each shot count. German tank commander Lieutenant Hans Fischer, 113th Panzer Brigade, captured September 25th. We were told the American Sherman was inferior, that our Panthers would dominate any engagement. The first rounds they fired bounced off as expected. Then something changed. Our tanks began exploding from frontal hits at ranges where this should be impossible. The Americans didn't need to flank us. They simply shot through our armor as if it wasn't there. It destroyed morale completely. The tactical implications ripple across the Western Front. German commanders, accustomed to Panther invincibility, suddenly face opponents who can kill them head-on. The psychological impact is devastating. By October 1944, captured German intelligence reports label HVAP ammunition a critical threat to armored operations. The Wehrmacht begins designing thicker armor for next-generation tanks, which arrive too late and in too few numbers to matter. The tungsten shortage continues, but word spreads among American tank crews. Patton himself has personally called Ordnance Department demanding maximum HVAP production. "I don't care if we have to trade our eyeglasses to get tungsten," he allegedly said. "Get those shells to my boys." Production increases to 10,000 rounds per month by December 1944. Still not enough for widespread use, but sufficient for critical operations. The combat results speak for themselves, but the real story is how this ammunition saved lives during the war's final battles. Make sure you're subscribed. The conclusion reveals the lasting impact that still affects tank warfare today. January 1945. Battle of the Bulge. German Panther and Tiger tanks spearhead Hitler's final desperate offensive through the Ardennes. American tank crews, now equipped with improved supplies of HVAP ammunition, meet them with newfound confidence. Staff Sergeant John McAuliffe, 10th Armored Division, later writes home, "The Panthers used to terrify us. Now we hunt them. 2 HVAP rounds through the turret and they're done. It's still dangerous. They can kill us easy, but at least we can fight back." Total HVAP production through war's end, approximately 350,000 rounds, a fraction of the 57 million conventional 76mm shells produced, but distributed where they matter most, to units facing concentrated armor threats. Post-war analysis credits HVAP ammunition with saving an estimated 1,200 American tanker lives between August 1944 and May 1945. For every Sherman that survived an encounter it would have lost with standard ammunition, that's 5 crew members who came home. At a 1946 reunion of the 4th Armored Division, a young Sherman gunner approaches Creighton Abrams, now a full colonel. "Sir," the gunner says, "my crew got hit by a Panther at Metz. We fired back with HVAP, punched right through him. He didn't get a second shot." The gunner extends his hand. "Because of you, because you knew how to use those rounds right, we came home." Abrams, famously gruff, simply nods. "You did the job. That's what mattered." The M93 HVAP round remains in U.S. inventory through the Korean War, though tungsten supply issues continue limiting production. modern armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot, APFSDs. Rounds used in current M1A2 Abrams tanks are direct descendants, still using tungsten alloy penetrators, still relying on the same fundamental physics: small, dense, hard penetrators at extreme velocity. The civilian engineer who developed the original prototype. His name appears in declassified documents only as BRL research staff. No medal, no official recognition. The Army's institutional memory attributes HVAP development to Ordnance Department collaborative effort. But in 1947, quietly, the Ballistic Research Laboratory promotes him to senior research engineer. His personnel file notes critical contributions to wartime ammunition development. He retires in 1963, never speaking publicly about his work. Creighton Abrams rises to 4-star general, commands U.S. forces in Vietnam, and becomes Army Chief of Staff. When the United States develops its next-generation main battle tank in 1980, it carries his name, the M1 Abrams. The tank's main gun fires APFSDS rounds with tungsten alloy penetrators traveling at 5,600 feet per second, descendants of those 4 experimental shells that turned the tide at Arracourt. In 2024, Ukraine receives M1A1 Abrams tanks equipped with M829 ammunition, tungsten cord sabots that defeat modern Russian armor using the same principles that civilian engineers sketched in 1943. The lesson isn't about tungsten or armor or even tanks. It's about the stubborn engineer who knew the experts were wrong, about the general who believed test data over conventional wisdom, about the rationed 4 rounds per tank that made impossible victories routine. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from the smallest changes. Sometimes that's illegal just means we haven't tried hard enough. And sometimes the difference between defeat and victory is 4 shells you're not supposed to waste.